Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, 2021 in Photos, a lens on Africa. Presented by Nat Hab Expedition Leader, Matt Meyer. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for being here today. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Rob. And thanks everyone, yes, for tuning in tonight, our time, for what has actually been a very, they're all fun to put together, these webinars, and they're all great to present. But this has been really nice and reflective over the last year and a little bit, and especially today. It's my little girl's first birthday today. So that adds another dynamic to what the last year has meant to me. And it was the first year after the pandemic started that allowed us to then revisit some of the places that we had been absent from for over 14 months. And so to start it off, as you can see, there's a beautiful sunrise over the Namibia Desert in the Sossusvlei region, which is in southern Namibia. But yes, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Rob, for hosting, and thanks to Nat Hab the WWF for having these awesome webinars for us. So I have decided to, I've narrowed it down to maybe 30 or 35 or so of my favorite photos, and they're not in order of my favorite to least favorite. None of them are least favorites. So essentially it's going to be going through from the beginning to the end of the year for me, and I will finish off with my favorite photo of the year as the very last one. So this is from the start of the year to the end of the year and moving through and across all the regions in Southern and East Africa that I've been guiding and have guided in 2021. So our first photo was quite a prickly affair for this young male lion. So this is taken in the special reserve in the southern Kalahari in South Africa, and the Kalahari Desert is often, it's always, and it's one of the driest places in Africa, but it's always brown and drab and not very colorful. But then this past rainy season, or the rainy season of 2020 and 2021, brought a flush of new life in that they got to 5 or 6 times their annual rainfall that fell over a single season. And so everything flushed green, and it was this beautiful array of different shadows and hues and of green that you don't often get to witness in the Kalahari. And so we were following these 2 male lions at night, and they happened across maybe 3 or 4 different individual porcupines. And this is the one that this male lion got the closest to. But you can see there, this is a porcupine that's turned around and facing backwards. His little head is on the opposite side of where the lion is facing him. And porcupines have 2 or 3 different sets of quills, where they've got these bristle-like quills that are on the back of their neck, and all of them are hairs. For anyone that watched some of our previous webinars where we spoke about porcupines, it's basically a hair growing out of a hair follicle, much like the hair on my head or on my arm, but they have the ability to erect and let them flat down. And these are their protection against predators like this. I mean, a porcupine's a big rat. It's a rodent the size of a guinea pig. And so if it was naked running around in the field, this lion would make a pretty quick meal out of it. Then this reserve is very special for and it's very well protected for their population of black rhino. Now again, this is something you don't get to see very often. This is a courting pair of black rhino, the female on the front and the male at the back. And they were running around in one of these concrete pans. Now, in a typical year, this green scrub, which is about this tall, is on top of what the Kalahari is very well known for. Because the Kalahari Desert was essentially it's an extinct seabed or a giant lake bed. So everything dried up, and some of these pans that were left are these big concrete basins, so a couple of feet thick, of just sort of chalk, concrete, and nothing really that big can grow because the root can't get. You can see the trees on the outside, but those are the dunes of the sand. The roots of those big trees can't get through this concrete pan. But every year, usually, this is white. And now with this over the rainfall being higher than average, all of these pans have this flush of green. So to see desert-adapted black rhinos covered in mud running across a green concrete pan is just, it's amazing. It was just unbelievable. And then he decided that we got a little bit too close and started giving us a bit of a mock charge, putting his head up as black rhinos do, ears up, listening, trying to see where we are. They don't have very good vision, and we were about 40 or 50 meters away at this, and he kept running up, and they make this sort of huffing and puffing, huffing and puffing, huffing and puffing. And then this is an oryx taken on one of these pans as well. This is just on the other side of where those black rhino were. And again, just something that you don't see is this unique setting of having an oryx, which is an incredibly adapted desert animal, running across this lush green grass. And it was just, it's an oxymoron of a photograph, because it's not what you would expect. And this is completely in its natural environment. It's not like this oryx has been taken out and put onto this reserve for no purpose of having it there. This is its natural environment. This is where it's been for its whole evolutionary state. And so just witnessing something like that, running across these green, rolling, almost as if you're in Ireland or Scotland with that little scrub. But just something that the eye doesn't make sense of it when you are looking at it. And a few days later, we stumbled across these two big, beautiful male lions, and you can see there. And one of the reasons why this is one of my favorite photographs is that they're two lions right next to each other, and the only thing that gives it away at first glance is those double tails at the back. Their legs are almost perfectly positioned and mirroring one another. Their front legs, back legs. The one, yes, is looking forward, and the other one is looking towards us. But those tails just almost like you have to take a double take. It's a double vision of a photograph. And then just before, this was in about late February, early March, Rich and I, and Rich, for those of you who don't know and haven't watched some of our previous webinars, Rich and I have done quite a few webinars together where we call them fireside chats. So we present certain topics together, and we started with some relationships between hyenas and lions, and then we did Homo sapiens and the evolution of that. We've done rivers, we've done birds, we've done trees. But one of the most fun episodes that we got to do was a virtual safari, where we went on site to Sabi Game Reserve in South Africa, and we filmed a virtual safari for about a week. And we didn't curate, but we put together this 30 or 40 minute short series of clips where we would go out and game drive, and we'd come across a sighting, and then we would explain it to the camera as if we were explaining it to a vehicle full of guests. And this was one of the more memorable sightings. This little elephant calf in the middle here. I mean, it's still pink behind the ears, still pink toes. So wasn't barely even over a week old. and it was stumbling around. And then Mom decided to run it past one of its older siblings, and just after this photo in the chaos, the sibling in front almost got pushed into the waterhole that they're running past. But it might not be the most well put together photograph, but it's the memory, and that's often what, in my eye, what makes a good photograph to me is the memory of it, and what it meant to me when I was taking that photo. And this was, yes, I'd done one or two other trips prior to this, but this was at a time of our lockdown and all of that, when we were starting to travel again. We were coming out of our shells that we'd been in for the last 14 months. And it was bridging that gap of the virtual presentations that we're doing, these fireside chats and these webinars, into a more tangible experience where we were out in the field. We were doing these little clips and these small series of films, where we were able to then interact with our guests, yes, online, but at the same time be in the field and get to experience it anew and what was to come. And then maybe a day or two later, we were just searching high and low for hornbills so that we could do a little piece on them, and dung beetles and dung balls. And we came across this yellow-billed hornbill sitting on a tree stump with the sun behind, and he took off as if on cue and on set. Okay, it's my time to shine. And so this was one of my, it's probably my favorite photo of that trip, and certainly my favorite photo of a yellow-billed hornbill, who are often not very, they're either flying away or flying towards or hopping into a brush. And so they don't really allow for much of photogenic opportunities or photographic opportunities for us to actually capture them, and certainly not one flying across the rising sun. Then about a month later, I was back in the Sabi Sands, and not too far from Sabi. This was taken at Mala Mala, and without a doubt, definitely not my best photograph of a leopard at Mala Mala by any stretch of the imagination. But it was what it represented, and this is taken. So if you were to imagine, as the crow flies up into the top left corner of this photograph, about 400 or 500 meters is Mala Mala Main Camp, which was my home for about a decade. And that rocky outcrop that you can see at the very top end, sort of top right-hand corner, was the rocky outcrop, which is called Strice. But that was the rocky outcrop that I used to look at every single morning when I would get up. My house, which is on the top part of the main camp area, looked onto that rocky outcrop. And so this river represents the lifeblood of Mala Mala and the region, the Sand River. And it's just, again, a lot of these have meanings of representing fresh beginnings, new starts. This was just after my little girl was born. And so it was a very personal, very grounding moment of being back with the leopard in the Sand River, looking onto those mountains, in these rocks. It was the early morning. We'd just pulled up behind her, and shortly after this, she gave us a roar. She was really vocal and active, walking around scent marking. And the thought was that there was possibly another female in the area that had been scent marking as well. And this was a younger female, recently coming into estrus, not really knowing where she held her place in the hierarchy of leopards, and just kind of trying to carve out her little bit of home And this river is what makes Mala Mala arguably one of the best places in Africa to view leopards. And in total, the Sabi Sands are these culminations of these rivers. So the Sabi River and the Sand River, and the vegetation that surrounds them is just perfect leopard habitat. And so that's what this photo just represented, something of a memory from the past and representing a new and fresh beginning going into the future. Then maybe a day or two later, we were driving up a dry riverbed just down one of the tributaries of the Sand River, the Machapuri River, and this is a leopard cub that a couple of other guides had been looking for a while. And my guide, the guide that I always request when I go to Mala Mala, is a good friend of mine. We worked together when I was there, and he was a guide before I got there, and he was a tracker before he was a guide. And he's really one of the most humble and nicest guys, but he is the best to find leopards. I call him the wizard because he'll find them anywhere, and no one could find this cub. Guys had been looking for 2 or 3 days, and no one was able to find it. And we drove up the river, and there she was, lying at sort of maybe 10 or 20 feet above the ground, just staring down at us. And I mean, it probably happened that the cub, because it's a youngster, it probably happened that it was lying in the brush underneath the tree when the last guide drove past and just climbed up to get a better view as the sun was setting, as the golden hour was approaching. And so there's a lot to do with luck, but also a lot to do with skill when looking for these creatures. And this leopard is third removed cousin twice and all of that of the female that we saw in the last photograph. And that is one of the most amazing and fun things to me, working for such a long time at Mala Mala, was getting to know and understand the family trees and the related leopards, and how this one moved there, and how this one is related to that one, and that one pushed that one out, and the dynamics of the population and the dynamics of the different individuals, and where they'd come from and where they were going. And so to see this youngster, who I'd witnessed great grandmothers in similar trees in the same riverbeds, it's an amazing experience to go back again and again and again and watch those lineages and how they move through time. Then a couple of weeks later, moved back again went back into the Kalahari, and as the winter's starting to settle in, the morning's a little bit more crisp, and there's less dew on the tips of the grass as the sun starts to rise. And this is the view from my tent. I mean, we stay in tents there. They're not basic tents, but it's not the Hilton or the Ritz. And it is just one of the most peaceful experiences in the Kalahari in the morning in winter, because the lack of sound, or the absence of sound, that you get in the summer, because there aren't as many insects, there are not as many invertebrates around, it's just the polar opposites are just so remarkable. And the scenery of the Kalahari, these wide open landscapes, the dramatic clouds that you get at the change of the season. So in the winter, for the whole of winter, there aren't many clouds. And then summer, they roll in, then you also do get those blue skies. But then early on in the spring, going into the summer, and then the transition from fall to winter, you have these days where it can be gray for a lot of the time. So you just have this blanket of clouds that hangs over, that every now and then there'll be a break, and there's just this ray of light that comes down. And we were sitting with this herd of zebra, waiting for them, watching, seeing what they were doing. There's a water hole just off and to the left. So we were going to see if they were going to come down to the water. And as if, again, on cue, the clouds opened, the rays shone down, and they were just standing in the middle of it, waiting to see what was going to happen, just like we were. Another animal that is present in the Kalahari, and what the Kalahari is well known for. One of the first publications, one of the first things that people really heard about the Kalahari. There was a book by Mark and Delia Owens, written in the 70s and the early 80s, called The Cry of the Kalahari. Now, the Cry of the Kalahari, the nickname is given to the call of the jackal. The black-backed jackal makes this very eerie, like almost like a coyote. And Mark and Delia went there with the intention of following lions and getting a bit of research on the area and its inhabitants. And one of the species that they really honed in and focused on was the brown hyena, and they were able to achieve some amazing bits of research, and they were able to get some data that's still used now as a benchmark for behavioral and family dynamics and interactions with these species and these brown hyenas. And they shone a spotlight on an animal that very few people had seen, let alone done research on or knew anything about. I mean, the Kalahari the tourists have only really been going there in higher numbers over the last 20 or 30 years. Before then, it was pretty inhospitable. No one wanted to go there. You didn't really think much about it. And this species was essentially what helped put the Kalahari on the map and allow people to come in. And it's this weird, I mean, it's a hyena. It doesn't look like what you would imagine as a hyena from the likes of The Lion King and a lot of the documentaries. You're looking at spotted hyenas mainly. But the brown hyena's got this kind of shaggy, almost socks, and they just kind of walk around and they will appear and then dissolve into their surroundings like no other animal I've ever seen. I've been back to this reserve many times. I've been to the Makharikari, which is in the northeastern region of the Kalahari, and then in the Namibia desert, which we'll see in a little bit, where they go all the way onto the beach and they hunt seals. Or when I say hunt, they kill seals. So brown hyenas are almost 100%, they're 97% scavengers. They don't hunt like spotted hyena do, and they don't eat termites like the aardwolf does. And so these guys are entirely scavengers, and we'll be sitting there looking across the blankets of like light brown, and this is a dark chocolate brown creature. It's unmistakable, and when you see it, you can't unsee it. And this light brown grassland that stretches further than the horizon, and 4 or 5 people scanning, and next thing, one will pop up 20, 30 meters away from you. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they den in burrows in the sand, and they can come out of any of these burrows in the sand. But sometimes you're sitting there and there are no burrows anywhere around. And one's just been lying in the grass there for the whole day, just sat there, and he just popped his head up and started walking. So quite a remarkable creature, and one that to go to the Kalahari and to see a brown hyena and to see one at a waterhole in the evening. This one walked straight up to the waterhole. We were actually just sitting there having sundowners, walked up to the waterhole 50, 60 yards away, Didn't really know we were there until it got to the water, and because it was cooling down, our scent had sunken down onto the water. As it put its head down, lifted its head up, looked around, knew there was someone there, drank its fill, and then moved on off. Then another amazing project that this reserve is doing, that very consistent, and you'll notice that all of these cheetah have got radio collars on them. And one of the things that they do is release and follow and track the animals and the predators that are naturally there, but need a bit of help to move their gene pool around. Cheetah are very susceptible to inbreeding and therefore a reduction of genetic stock, as well as wild dogs, lions, most of your predators, if they are even in a really big reserve, unless it's the size of the Kruger Park or any of the natural large reserves that are hundreds of thousands of acres large, those they can control their populations naturally themselves. But as soon as you put a fence around an area and you have to then help and assist with this genetic movement, it makes things significantly more productive to have these tracking collars on them. And some of the, a lot of the places in the Kruger Park, in Botswana, in Namibia, even in Kenya and Tanzania, you'll see an elephant with a radio collar on that set to send signal to a satellite once or twice a day to watch the movement of that. And that allows you to understand population dynamics, growth, areas that they're spending more time in, different times of the year. And that allows you, or allows field managers and ecologists to get a better understanding and to allow the reserves and the national parks to thrive. It's no hidden fact that areas in Africa, areas around the world, natural areas are shrinking. And so to be able to better manage the remaining areas, we need to do things like this. And they might not be as photogenic as a cheetah lying on a termite mound without a radio collar on, but it's the representation of what this, or the meaning of what this represents, of these 4 male cheetahs that have just been released, all of them with collars on. And you might ask, well, why not just put one collar on one cheetah? Each of these collars is an incredible investment, and a pretty steep financial investment. But you've got to, every now and then one won't work. And so if that's the one that you put on those 4 cheetah and it doesn't work for those 4 or 5 days, you've lost your cheetah. Now, where do they go? Then you're going to try and start backtracking, finding where they've come from, where they might have gone, where they possibly are going. And when you've invested so much money and manpower and resources into the release of these cheetah, rather not risk it and just kind of cover all your bets. And so all of these cheetah have got collars, and they're all doing still very well. They were released last May, and they're all still doing very well, hunting successfully, and have taken over a large tract of this reserve and made it their own. And then one of the things that the Kalahari is also very well known for is its night sky. And the further west of here, where our next few slides will go into Namibia, these are dark zones or dark areas. And one of the world's largest satellites for star viewing is not too far from this reserve, and it's because of the absence of light pollution from urbanization. And in this region, a very iconic tree is the shepherd's tree, and that's what this tree is in the bottom right corner of the photo. So shepherd's tree with the speckles of the Kalahari night sky, like glitter on a canvas. It's one of the, again, it's a sky that you can't describe. It's one you have to see for yourself to believe that there are that many stars. And then this, I had to throw this in here. Everyone who's been on a safari has seen 1,000 of these and probably are thinking, why have you put a photograph of a lilac-breasted roller in your presentation? And it's because this is the first photograph, well, the best photo and one of the first that I've actually ever taken of a lilac-breasted roller. The guest that I was with, this was in the Central Kruger, we were joking about it, and I said, oh, I've never really taken many photos of lilac-breasted rollers, and this one sat there, and we drove closer. Because usually they fly away, and they fly away from you. So you see that beautiful electric turquoise underwing, but you don't get to actually sit and look at the bird. And he sat there, and he didn't move, and he didn't move. And we drove closer and closer and closer. And this is taken at the lowest extent of my lens at 100 mils from about 5 meters away. And just didn't want to move. This was his spot, this was his perch. He wasn't threatened by us. And he sat there. We viewed him for a good 10 or 15 minutes. There was an elephant behind that everyone else was looking at, and I was looking at this bird. And when our guide started up to drive away, drove away, and he just kind of didn't move. So very, very opposite and against their normal characteristic. And so that's why this is why the lilac-breasted roller has made it into my highlights for 2021, is because this is one of the first. And now I don't have to take another photo of one again. So I can just look at them. And I mean, obviously anyone who has watched any of my previous webinars knows my affliction for rhinos and my love for them. And I'll always try and squeeze in talking about a rhino, even if I'm doing a talk on Madagascar where there aren't any rhinos. They're all on Homo sapiens, and I'll find a way to come up with an excuse to talk about rhinos. So this is one of my favorite rhino shots of all time. And purely because, the next photo is the original. And then that is the one that I've chosen. And I just love that reflection, that mirror, but the inverted image of it, because you've got a double take. It's like the double tail of the lion. You've got to look at it a little bit more carefully and go, what is that? And then young male lion trying to jump on his mom while running through the grass. And this is beautiful winter up in Madikwe in the northwestern province on a Nat Hab trip with this lioness running through this red soil, backlit in the morning, and it is pin sharp. You very rare, like when you've got animals running towards you, and especially with tricky lights first thing in the morning, it's spray and pray. That's what I do. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm the most skilled photographer. I do take some photos, but every now and then you just hit the nail on the head. And this was one of those shots that as soon as I took it, I knew, yep, there we go. I put the camera away and I got to enjoy the rest of the sighting because I'd taken the photo that I wanted to take, that I'd set out to take. And like I said, pin sharp, absolutely pin sharp. And then not so long after that trip, I got a call to last minute changes in itineraries and plans. I needed to hop on a plane to Namibia and jump on a almost 3-week 5-country safari. And our first stop was the Sossusvlei in the southern Namib Desert in southern Namibia. Oldest desert in the world, one of the most remarkable landscapes that one can witness anywhere. It looks like the moon. And this is a difference in perspective of elevation that you only get if you're going up, obviously. And we were on a hot air balloon ride, and the photo at the very beginning of the slideshow was taken about 10 minutes earlier, or no, about 10 minutes later, because the sun was just coming up and we were high up, as a little bit of moisture is starting to rise. And these little rocky outcrops. And it's just, these riverbeds here, they remain dry for, some of them can be dry for a decade, 2 or 3 decades, and then they get, 10 inches of rain over the course of, or maybe not 10, but 5 inches of rain over the course of a day, and they turn into these torrents, and then they stop flowing. And then they dry riverbeds for the next 10 years. So this is just, this is obviously looking east with the Sossus Flay and Dead Flay behind us, looking towards the sun as the sun's coming up. Then you get, every now and then you get, as lucky as can be, something like an oryx, an iconic desert adapted animal, standing in front of one of the iconic dunes of the region, of the Sossus Flay region. So the dunes are numbered 1 through, I think they go all the way up to the mid-60s. This is Dune 47. Dune 45 is one of the very well-known ones, and then Dune 7 is the biggest one. And the numbers mark the number of kilometers from the river that marks the southwestern corner of what is called the Sossus Flay, or the Dead Flay of the Namib Desert. So this is June 47, oryx standing, sunrise, illuminating the one side, because that's essentially, you want to go to these dunes at sunrise, because then you get that dramatic difference between the eastern and the western faces of these dunes, and that bright red hue that just jumps out at you as you look at it. And then, this is just, it's an oryx walking into the desert. You can't, it doesn't need an explanation. Then from Namibia, we went into Botswana, and we went into the Okavango Delta. And this is, to date, my favorite photograph of a wild dog. It was a curious adult male that we had been looking for this den with these new pups. No one had seen the pups. We got glimpses of them in the brush and in the thicket, but this adult dog was outside of the thicket. The thicket is often to the left, and he was just curious, but at the same time, you could feel that his presence was there as a sentinel of him just making sure that we were keeping our space and the puppies were safe and inside. And yeah, just like I said, my favorite photograph I've ever taken of a wild dog. Just that it might not be the most perfect, but it's the meaning to me and what he looks like, and the expression of the protector, and what he was doing and what he was there to represent. And then, a male lion in the Linyanti, which is up in the northern parts of Botswana. It's just, that's as close as you're going to get to a perfect photograph of a king male lion. A couple of battle scars, and just well positioned. He was walking towards us with slight breeze to just give that mane a bit of depth, and just the epitome of beauty and power at the same time. And then not too long after that, I was back in Mala Mala in the Sabi Sands, and back with a female leopard that I'd known from a very young age, who's grown up and developed into a very successful and prominent leopard in Mala Mala. And this female leopard is arguably the most photographed leopard currently at Mala Mala. And her mother was the same, and her grandmother was the same, and her great-grandmother was the same. And her grandmother was a female leopard that I got to know very well in my the first part of my career there, and then her mother, and so on. And so it was just great to go back there and get to see again that lineage, that family tree continuing between the leopards at Mala Mala. And then closer to main camp, different leopard, this female with 2 cubs. And to raise a single leopard cub is one thing, to raise 2, and these cubs were almost at about the 9-month age when we were watching them. And to say a leopard cub is a handful is one of the biggest understatements one can have in nature. They are just they're chaos, absolute chaos. Then up into Central Africa, this was my first ever active shoe we sat with this female for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, watched her attempt several times at lungfish close by in the thicket. But this to me is what an angry bird truly is. It looks like it is going to come over and try and eat you itself. And I mean, it's not a small bird. It stands 4.5, 5 feet tall, massive, massive bird, but just this imposing figure in the swamps just outside of Entebbe in Uganda. And then chimpanzees in Chibali Forest is, if it's not on everyone's bucket list, it should be, to sit there and a couple of the photos to follow will also have the eyes as the focal point. But when you're with these animals and you spend time with them, you get to look at their eyes and how they look at you and how they interact, and they're sitting there. You can almost imagine that they're having a similar thought pattern of what we are. What are they doing? Why are they doing this? How are they doing it? And to stare at one of our closest relatives and spend time with them is just, there's very few experiences like it in the natural world. And this is one very hard to beat. And then, I mean, big male lions in a tree. We often only think of leopards in trees, but in this particular region in Uganda, the lions like to hang out in these big trees, and they sit there. These 2 male lions were there for 2.5 days. They didn't leave this tree. They came down once to drink at the very beginning, and we found them, and we saw them go back up, and they did not come down. They did everything up there. They peed, they pooed, they did it all from the tree. And to escape the flies, but then also the heat. There's a nice breeze up in the tree. And yeah, these are massive, massive big trees. So quite a sight of having, I mean, between the 2 of them, that's almost 1,000 pounds of cat. And then, as I mentioned, the eyes of these apes. So these are the mountain gorillas in Bwindi, in southwestern Uganda, and just that looking and witness of those eyes, it's like looking into. I find it like almost like looking into the mirror of the soul of a human, and how that link is so close. And their emotion and their ability to perceive just like we do. And then again, it's not the most well lit. It's not, but everything about this photo just to me, it exudes power, having one of those giant rainforest trees behind this big silverback, who's just sitting there. He just finished eating a handful of I can't remember what he was eating, and he was just about to get up, but he's this relaxed, contemplative powerhouse that at any second could run and do something drastic, but has docile, serene demeanor that, yeah, they are a remarkable animal, the gorillas. And then moving towards the end of the year and the slideshow is I went to the Makharihari to look for and to hope to be a witness to the zebra migration, which we've alluded to. Rich and I have spoken about on one or two of our fireside chats, is the longest circular mammal or ungulate migration in Africa, twice as long as the Great Migration in Kenya and Tanzania, is the zebra migration in Botswana. And the focal point for the meeting of these zebra is the Boteti River, which runs kind of, the Okavango River runs into the Kalahari Desert and fans out, and it almost stops at this wall of that tectonic plate shift movement that has created the delta, and out of that sneaks 2 or 3 rivers, and one of them is the Boteti, and that then runs down into the northeastern Kalahari and is the barrier, well, not the barrier, but it's the vein between the northeastern Kalahari or the central Kalahari and the Makharihari salt pans. And every year when there's the rains come down, fill these salt pans with a flush of green, and these zebra come down in their droves of 45, 50,000 zebra. But they can all start coming down a little bit earlier than the rains fall because they come down to the Boteti. And this is just a representative of the chaos of the back and forth motion of these stripes, these dazzles upon dazzles, just up and down all day, every day. We sat in this one place on the river for, it must have been 4 or 5 hours, and we probably bore witness to, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 zebra coming down to this one place on the river. And the river's long, and so there are many places for them to come down, but we sat there, and I mean, just to witness that many in one area, it is remarkable. Then, I mean, a female cheetah with cubs at sunrise on a salt pan is just, again, it's like the oryx and the sand dunes. It doesn't need much of an explanation. It is just spectacular. And this female cheetah, we were there in this area for about a week, and she made maybe 3 or 4 kills over the course of the week. Cubs are going to grow up to be successful hunters, but it's one of the toughest places in Africa to live, and they make it successful because they've adapted to it. They've allowed nature to take its course, but at the same time, they've moved with it with fluidity. And it was wrapping up towards the end of the year that, again, this is a message of this photo and what this photograph represents to me, and that's adaptation, and how the world is different to what it was in 2020, to what it was in 2010, to what it was in 2000, and how we have to adapt and how we have to move with things. And there are so many things that are out of our control. And there's so many things that are out of the control of this female cheetah, but she makes it work. And it's tough for the majority of the time, but she's raised 2 cubs, and these cubs will grow up to be successful like their mother, and it'll be tough for them as well. But it's because they've adapted, and they continue to adapt. And then you can't talk about the Makharikari without talking about meerkats. These little characters are hilarious. You know where they're going to go in, you know where they're going to come out, and you sit there and you wait and you spend hours with them foraging and pulling up scorpions and just running around. And again, chaos. So much fun to spend time with them. And there are 2 photos here of meerkats because they are so cool. This was, we knew the hole that they were going into, and we sat there positioned, ready, waiting for them to go into their hole at sunset, so we could just get that last one. Looking out, making sure there's nothing coming, no predators coming to dig them out of their den for the night, and then boom, they go down as the sun goes down. And that brings me to my last photograph of, well, third to last. The next 2 are my wife's favorite photo of the year for her, and then my favorite photo will be the final one. But this is the sun setting. This is our last day in the Makharikari, the sun setting over one of these salt pans. Just as I said, the horizons are endless. The sky is endless. Everything there is just endless. So sun setting on an amazing year, an amazing trip, and giving rise to new beginnings the next day. So the next photo, as I mentioned, is my wife's favorite, and you've seen it already, because of the chimp in Chibali. And then the final one is my favorite, and it's what it represents. It's the life and the death, and the end and the beginning, and a new turn on something, and something that is present and will always be present, is just that the brown hyena skull with the sunset in the desert. There are few things that are as representative of an area as I think this. So that is me for the photograph talks, or part of it. I'll hand over back to Rob if we have any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Now, before we start the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. All right, let's get to it. Now, we have a lot of question about lenses. What kind of camera lens do you typically use?
So for years, my favorite lens was 70-200 2.8. And for years, I was also a Canon man. And then actually, it was pretty much around the beginning of these photos that I switched to Sony. And it was actually a lot to do with Rich. And so I shoot with Sony now. I shoot with their mirrorless cameras. And my go-to lens for all of my trips is the 100-400 millimeter.
Do you use a telephoto lens at all for any of the pictures?
Yes. So all of those photos were taken with the telephoto with that 100-400.
Perfect. Thank you. So can you provide any other details on your camera equipment? Because people just loved your photos. What other tips can you give them?
I mean, so again, as I mentioned, I shoot with the 100-400, and then my camera body is the Sony 7 Alpha Mark III or version 3, and my motto is kind of spray and pray and see what comes out. It's obviously a lot to do with composition. You will have an eye for taking a photo, but in the digital age and our ability to store media, there's no need to not take as many photos as possible. But then at the same time, and it's one of the reasons why I have quite a few photos, is that on most of my trips, and any of the listeners who have traveled with me will know, is that I will recommend, obviously, yes, take a lot of photos, but at the same time, look down out of your camera and don't spend your entire trip looking through the lens. because often people, that's the only focus. Oh, we need to get great photos, but then you don't get to experience it. And like, I have memories of every single one of those photos, and that's what's important to me, is what the photograph represents. And yes, it might be a great photo, it might it come down to equipment, etc., etc. But at the same time, it's also how that photo makes you feel. And if you don't know when you took that photo, how you took it, why you took it, just that it's a good photo, I don't know. That's it's not how you photography. And so for me, I will give all of my guests any of the photos that I've taken on a trip, because then that allows them to stop looking through the lens and actually get to feel how that sighting, how that animal is making them feel. But my gear is, yeah, I carry a single body. It's that Sony 7 Alpha 3, and then I've got the 100 to 400 mm lens, and I've got a very basic wide angle lens. And I had a bunch of other gear when I was still shooting with Canon, and I'm still slowly building up my current gear to what I have now.
So do you do much editing on your photos?
Basic editing. So I'm not going to crop out or cut out a tree or paste over something like that. So not any excessive post-production editing, but some adjustments in light composition and contrast, a little bit of sharpening here or there, and adjusting of color tones. Yes, I do that, and I use Lightroom and Lightroom Classic, and then a little bit of Photoshop if I do need to clean the image up a little bit. But I don't cut trees out, like I said. So nothing too in depth in post production.
Great, thank you for tackling that. Now, that picture of the two lions running that you got the one shot and then just enjoyed the moment, did you have that set up on a tripod, or were you holding that in your hand?
No, that was handheld. So on the back of a vehicle. So with a lot of these, your, let's say, traditional African safaris, you'll be in a vehicle. So the chimps, the gorillas, and lemurs and things like that, and some of your landscape stuff, you can be on foot, and then you have the opportunity to put it up on a tripod. But if you've got a lion running at you, if you're not in a hide, then you're going to be in a vehicle, and there you might have a beanbag, or you're free holding it, or in some cases you could have it mounted onto one of the roll bars with a gimbal head. But for the most part, for flexibility and freedom of motion, you'll want to be hand holding it. Or if you've got a leopard in a tree and you're sitting on a beanbag, then you can be resting on something. But all of my action shots are shot free-handed.
Matt, you had some amazing night shots as well. Did you use any kind of lighting for those?
So that night shot of the shepherd's tree, so that was obviously on a tripod. I've got a fairly steady hand, but not that steady. And what that would do, you shoot in about a 30-second exposure on that. So you open up your shutter for 30 seconds, and then at the very end, take a flashlight or a spotlight, but at as dim a setting as you can. So put a filter over it, or a t-shirt or something, whatever you've got. So you're essentially, it's almost like you've got a candle light to then paint whatever you want to be illuminated more than the stars. And that's how you get that what would you call it? The feel that tree is then illuminated more so, or the effect that is illuminated. And that you just paint the tree with a little bit of light for 2 or 3 seconds before the photo, before your shutter closes, and that's how you get that effect.
Great. So where were you when you saw that amazing silverback? Were you up in the mountains?
Yeah, so that was in Bwindi, impenetrable forest, which is in southwestern Uganda. And that photo of that silverback was actually within a stone's throw from the lodge that we stay at. And that's a family of gorillas that they've been known to walk down the main streets of Bohoma, the town that we stay in. And they don't interact with the people, they don't take food, they don't do anything. It's just moving from one region of their territory to another. And he was one of the first gorillas we encountered on our trek. As we got to the group, he was kind of sitting on the periphery of the group, and he just sat there for 2 or 3 minutes while we took our photos, and then, as if on cue, just kind of stood up and walked past the whole group without even sort of flinching. And I mean, a big silverback weighs in excess of 350, 400 pounds. So it's a massive animal. And for me, that photograph just encapsulated the power of those creatures in the setting of that beautiful lush green rainforest that we see them in.
So the zebra migration is an amazing thing to see. Can you tell us where and when is the best time to experience that?
So their arrival is dependent on the rains in the region, and that is the unpredictable part of it. So to be there when they arrive, we were very lucky. We got there around when we thought the rains would start, and almost on cue, boom, they started within 2 or 3 days of us being there, and the zebra started to move in. So the beginning of it is very tricky. And we were also there for a long time. We were in the region for almost a month. But to witness it as one of our listeners who is probably going to be doing a 1 or 2 week trip, the best time of year to go to see the full extent of the migration is going to be sort of January, February, because that's when most of the rain has fallen. The grass is good, the zebra are eating, and they're happy, and it's before everything starts to dry. Because these pans, the one thing about the Makarikari pans is that only sort of certain water points are good for them to drink, because the salt pans, they get rain, they get wet, and it's only that deep, but it's so salty that the water is undrinkable. And so the zebra are there solely for the grass, and they drink water out of the puddles that fall, or some of the small natural little depressions that aren't salt pans that fill up with water. Now, as soon as those dry up, there's no water for them. So they've got to eat, and they walk all the way back to the Buteti River. Then they drink, and then they come 2 or 3 day trek back to eat, and then they go back. So to see the full extent, you want to be there while it's still raining, but before it stops, and obviously after it starts. So January, February would be a good time, and the best time to have the best luck. Let's say that.
Great, thanks, Matt. But unfortunately, that's the last question we'll have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you for any closing comments you may have.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in today. Thanks to Nat Hab and the WWF, as always, for allowing us and giving us this platform to share these topics, these photographs, and our love for nature and conservation with you all. And thank you to all of you for tuning in week after week, and almost now 2 years into these webinars, and it's been a great lot of fun. So thanks, Rob, Nat Hab, WWF, and to all of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt, for sharing your amazing photographs and presentations today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. Now, if you're interested in information on how you can travel with Nat Hab, give us a call at the number on your screen, or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are more than happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.